Joker, directed by Todd Phillips, is out in cinemas now, starring Joaquin Phoenix. It's the latest take on the iconic comic book character, perhaps the most famous of Batman's antagonists. It is also the first movie that is centered on the Joker character, with Batman not only being absent from the story, but in general from the world of the film at the time the story takes place. Batman does not exist at all when this movie takes place. So we're introduced to a man named Arthur Fleck, an aspiring stand-up comedian who makes a living by taking odd jobs, mostly as a clown. At the beginning of the film, he gets mugged and beaten up while working as a clown with a sign advertising for a business. Then we learn more and more about him. He lives with his mother in a shithole apartment, seems to have no friends whatsoever. He's also ill. He has this condition which makes him laugh uncontrollably at completely random moments. And then, as the story unfolds, we watch this man that doesn't have that much to begin with gradually lose each of those things and spiral further and further into darkness and into insanity, eventually becoming the Joker that we know. So the first thing that needs to be mentioned is the central performance. This is a very slow and deliberate character study, and for that movie to work, the role needs to be performed well. And I think there was some doubt going around before the movie even went into production. It had to do mainly with the fact that Joker has already been presented 4 times in live action media. We've had George Romero in the old Batman TV series, Jack Nicholson in the Tim Burton version from 30 years ago, Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight, and finally Jared Leto doing whatever the fuck it was that he was doing in Suicide Squad. So there was this question of whether Joaquin Phoenix would do something new with the character, something that would be original and not derivative of what has already been done. And of course, how it would compare in terms of quality to especially Heath Ledger's iconic performance. Well, the answer is that Phoenix is bloody brilliant. He does in fact explore the aspects of Joker that haven't been touched on before, and everything that he's trying to do, he executes perfectly. His mannerisms and physical fragility as Arthur at the beginning, and his slow but believable metamorphosis into Joker, and everything that sort of comes in between, it's just mesmerizing to see. And it's shown in all of its glory because we have a lot of those close-ups of his face. As Arthur is becoming Joker, there are scenes which are violent and disturbing and unpleasant to watch. And as his character changes, he himself becomes more terrifying. I love that there is one particular scene in the film which you can pinpoint and say, there, that's it. This is the moment. This is the precise second that he's no longer Arthur Fleck. He's Joker now. And it's absolutely chilling. Then there's the laugh, which Phoenix apparently modeled after real people that actually do have the same condition that he portrays in the movie. It's unnerving and creepy, but there's also this aspect of it being uncomfortable for the person that's laughing. And that's played out quite well. So the very core of the film is absolutely nailed. Then there's the story, the plot itself, which I think was also executed in a great way. It's not based on any particular comic book, it's its own thing, it's something entirely new and fresh. And it has serious undertones of class struggle, of this stark difference between the rich and successful and the poor and struggling. It has poverty and illness as things that can push a man to the edge. And I absolutely loved how there is this grander story taking place almost in the background of the film, a story to which Arthur Fleck and Joker are absolutely instrumental and at the heart of it all. And at the same time, kind of outside of it, on the side of things, only really there coincidentally, which also fits the chaotic nature of Joker's character in the comic books. There are parts of the plot which are deliberately left ambiguous, and at the end of the day, we as the audience have solid reason to not believe everything we see. Arthur, from whose perspective we experience the story, is shown to be an unreliable narrator. Right at the very beginning of the film, we learn that he tends to imagine stuff about himself, imagines himself in different scenarios, much like in The King of Comedy. There's a scene where he's watching a late night comedy show and imagines himself in the audience in the studio. And then later on, that aspect of his character is further developed and explored, and that makes the viewer doubt pretty much everything we see. We know that there are certain parts of Arthur's story that are definitely delusions, creations of his mind, but since we know that for sure only about a handful of them, there is this underlying, feeling that a case can be made for others as well. There's the constant gray area where we have to decide for ourselves whether we want to believe or not in the things we see. And I think that also fits quite well with Joker as a character. A large part of the comic book mythos of him was always the fact that we knew very little about who he was. That he was this terrifying, unexplainable, unknown factor. And despite the fact that this is an origin story which gives him the spotlight, some of that mystique is definitely preserved, from which I'm pretty grateful. Apart from the comic book sources, the film is heavily inspired by Scorsese films, The King of Comedy, which I already mentioned, and Taxi Driver, from which it borrows, from both of which are those slow character studies of disturbed individuals, and from both of which Joker borrows that sense of being alone in a society that's looking down upon you. There's also a fair bit of Nightcrawler, I think, in the film. There's this bit where Arthur goes into a nightclub watching a comedy performance, and is trying to figure out what jokes are funny, and is taking notes. And he looks really creepy in there, obviously trying to blend in with the crowd, with other humans, but being slightly off in comparison. I'm also pretty sure there's a direct homage played to Heath Ledger's version towards the end, purely visually speaking. There's a shot of Joker which is very reminiscent of one from The Dark Knight, although I won't say exactly which one for fear of spoilers. Then there's the way the movie looks and sounds like, and I'm also happy to say that it is more cinematic in those aspects than may have been expected of this small character study. The music builds the atmosphere and helps set the mood, so does the cinematography and camera work. And here I want to point out one crucial thing that made me love the film even more, and it's its treatment of Gotham City, almost as a character in itself. If you're familiar with Batman, you'll know that in the comic books and in the classic animated series from the 1990s, the city of Gotham had a very distinct style. It didn't really look like an existing town. There was this mix of skyscrapers bathed in the darkness of the night and constantly washed by rain, and the city down below, the sewers, the rundown, derelict apartment buildings of the poor, the ruined shops and abandoned garages and warehouses. It was always this very thick and unpleasant place to be in, and in that way, very fitting as the setting for Batman stories. It felt natural as a place where crime would flourish, but also as a place where a dark vigilante like Batman could exist. The movies so far, I felt, always missed the mark somewhat on that front. Burton's Gotham was distinctly weird, but it wasn't as played up in the story. And Batman Begins did tap into that thick feel of the city, but then the next two movies in the trilogy completely dropped that aspect. Joker uses Gotham properly. The city is the absolute perfect environment for someone like Arthur to exist and for someone like Arthur to become Joker in. There's garbage on the streets, the buildings look old and not maintained very well, there's graffiti and puddles of rain everywhere, the subway lights don't work properly. It has this thick atmosphere that it should have, and it sucks you in completely. I think that's something that maybe not everybody will notice straight away, but in any case, I think it works on a subliminal level to pull you into the film. And I certainly appreciate the effort that went into creating this consistent scenery. There are small things that I didn't like about the film that I think could have been done better. I didn't like the reference to Bruce Wayne and Batman that appears in the last act of the film. I think it was a bit unnecessary. And I also feel like the ending overstays its welcome a little bit. It's just a touch dragged out. It lingers for a minute or two too long. But having said that, I think overall this experiment of making an entire movie about a supervillain's origins worked amazingly well. Perhaps because it's actually as far away from a comic book movie as it could be while still being a comic book movie. There are no superheroes, there are no action sequences, no heroics, just a man and his sanity slowly slipping away. Brilliant but chilling film.